All right. So I want to talk about the part that I think most people are afraid of, the budget piece, and I promise this will be painless. All right. So budgets don't have to be as difficult as people think because they are a prediction of costs associated with the program, right? They're an estimate of what your program needs to achieve its objectives. And again, that's those words, objectives, right? And of course, they serve as a basis for some kind of communication with the grantor and others. So this is the reason why we do a budget. Operations guide, a planning tool, a management tool, a communication tool, a policy tool, a financial control tool, and as a contract. I want to go back to the third to last, a policy tool. This part is important. How does a budget become a policy tool? A budget is a policy tool because it is a statement of your values. If in my household budget, right, I have discretionary income and I dedicate 50% of my discretionary income towards vacation and travel. It means I prioritize traveling. I prioritize maybe family time. I prioritize taking a break, right? If on the other hand, in that household, I prioritize 75% of that money to buy lottery tickets, pursuing riches that remain as elusive as ever. What does that say about my priorities and my values? It means I prioritize chance over certainty. It means I prioritize probability over absoluteness. Right? That's key. Now let's bring that into organizations, particularly public agencies. The budget in a public agency is a greater statement of our politics than anything else is. Because if we say we prioritize children, but our children's services budget is sparse and inadequate to meet the needs of the community, we are either lying, delusional, or both. Because where we put our money is where we indicate where our values actually lie. If we say we support the immigrant community, as many have said recently, in light of what's been going on, we support the immigrant community, but we put no support behind that in terms of our dollars and our cents, then that's just talk. It really is just talk. But in the United States, Americans often like to embrace ideology until that ideology requires them to reach into their pocketbooks. All right? If you prioritize teaching children the arts, music, then into it. So when I look at a budget, for example, I'm very, very able to tell where the priorities of the Board of Supervisors lie because they vote on it. It's their budget. They own it, whether they like it or not. And when I come to an organization that's involved in services, your budget becomes the policy tool. And it sends a message. It sends a message to members of the public that they value one thing over the other. I asked my grad students in HCA 642, Healthcare Program Development and Grant Writing, to look at the Form 990, which is the nonprofit equivalent of your 1040, right? To see where organizations get their money from and how they prioritize its spending, nonprofits, because that document is public. So when a foundation says, and this is an important technique, by the way, to understand if you have structural and ideological alignment with the foundation, pull their Form 990. And if they are a foundation operating on $10 million a year and they're saying, we support all these services for the Latino community. But when you look at their 990, it accounts to 1% of their budget. They're lying. It's a farce. And so the 990 says a lot more about our priorities because it represents a reporting to the IRS of their operational budget. So look closely. And then understand where your own values lie with regards to your organization's budget if you play a role, right? I am always of the view that people trump things, you know? Those of you who are parents, you understand this. I talk a lot, and maybe to some people's chagrin, but I don't care. That little offense never hurt anybody, yet. I talk a lot about my younger son on the spectrum. I had an hourglass in my office that I've had for 20 years. And as soon as my son got old enough, he came in one day into that office, and that hourglass was given to me as a gift, and it meant a lot. And he looked at it, and he was fascinated by it, and he took it, and he smashed it. Wow. And I looked at it, and for all of about 2 seconds, I felt the shock and disappointment of the moment. But by the time I got to seconds number 3 and 4, all I saw was my son looking to me to see what my reaction is going to be. And I said to him, oops, well, that one is broken. We'll have to try to find another hourglass. And he looked at me and said, Papa, another hourglass. I say that because as much as I valued that, I needed to convey the greater value to him, that there's nothing in my world, nothing in this office, nothing in my world that is of greater value than you. All right? So we have to take our policies we talk about and bring them into our lives, but they come with costs. They come with broken hourglasses. They come with a bigger chunk of the budget. They come with you as the executive director deferring that 10% raise that you think is so long overdue because the client base is building, and you and your 10% base will be able to spend this summer in the south of France. They will need it for food. See the difference? All right? So that's what I mean by a budget as a policy tool. So what does this actually look like? Well, in order for you to understand it, for those of you who don't have a financial background, I want to give you quickly, really quickly, some of the language about budgets. And we're doing great on the time, actually. The language of budgets, like I gave you the language of grant writing this morning. Revenue. Revenue is simply what it sounds like, the income you generate from a variety of sources. Expense are the costs that you incur. And in kind, which we will need to talk about, are non-cash revenue or expense that are directly connected to the operation of your program. We talked about the matching funds this morning. What we did not talk about is direct costs and indirect costs. Direct costs are the costs that can be directly attributable or traced to the production or delivery of the services that you have. All right? So if, for example, you have a program where you are giving stipends to young people for doing a particular thing. And by the way, but I use these illustrations. Whenever I use one like this, it's because I tend to favor it. So just so you know, we actually do fund a number of programs from our grants where we provide funds to organizations who in turn give stipends to younger people. All right. You see, I would much rather provide them with options and alternatives and leave them out there to make decisions about where to get money that's less than appreciated by us. But that's another story. So direct costs, costs that can be directly traced to the production, and the indirect costs, right, which are also sometimes called administrative costs or overhead, refers to those expenses referring to the infrastructure. So for example, in your organization, you may have 3 different grant programs you're operating, right? So all 3 share the price of the rent for your space, right? All 3 share the price of the cost of the electricity, for example, the overhead costs, the copy machine lease. Those are indirect costs. Or you share a portion of the executive director's salary. That's indirect because the executive director may not be directly operating the program. They may be a program director. So that can be there as well. Operating expense, a category of expenditure that's having to do with anything but personnel. And budget justification, which you will need, this is a detailed narrative that accompanies your budget. So here's the thing about grant budgets. Are you ready for this? And many people don't know this. Every line item in your budget submitted to a grantor must have a description as to what that line item is. It is called a budget narrative or a budget justification. So when we say to people, when we're doing our bidders conferences, that you need to provide a budget and a budget narrative, they go, a budget for what? Narrative? What do you mean a narrative? A line-by-line description of what it is, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. And of course, units of service I'll come back to. These are the general categories you'll see in most budgets: personnel, benefits, supplies, equipment, travel, direct and indirect costs. Back to the logic model. Because your budget will be based on what you promise to deliver in the logic model. So my friends, in the world of grant writing, I'm afraid A equals B, B equals C, so A equals C. This is not as disjointed an effort as you may think. So let's talk first about the different types of budgets that you can probably submit to a grant or agency. There are 3 types I want to talk about. I want to talk about the most widely used today, last, okay? Let's start first with the line item budget, and it looks like this. All the line item budget does is tells the name of the program, and it divides the costs into categories: personnel, operating expenses, and then it's broken down from there, right? So as you can see, personnel, total salary and benefits is $91,000 for this small program. And then you have total direct costs, which are operations and salary and benefits, $97,000. And then there's that indirect cost rate. Now, people ask, how do you get to the indirect cost rate? It is an agreed upon rate. All right, this is not that 10% is not just an arbitrary number. It's one that you may have negotiated with the grantor, or it's the standard one utilized by your organization. Take heed, however, that particularly the federal government often has a restriction on what the indirect cost rate actually is that they will reimburse. So find out before you dive in. So this is generally your line item budget. It just simply lists what everything costs. That's it. The second one is a modification of the line item budget. This is called a revenue and expense budget. And that's the exact same program, but look at the difference here. Instead of just having the costs listed below where it says expenses, it now has the sources of revenue on top as well. And what this does is that it tells you that this program is operating with a balanced budget, because the total amount of projected revenue that will be coming in, which will come from 3 sources, the DOJ, Y&H Soda Foundation. Look at what's in parentheses behind Y&H Soda Foundation. And what does that mean again? They applied for a grant to Y&H, but they haven't received an answer yet. But you can still include that tentatively in your budget proposal. The catch is, at some point, if you go for a grant interview, you know what you may be asked? What if you don't get it? And then you have to be ready to answer, right? And there's a fraternity that gave $1,700, so this is a balanced budget. But the most required budget for almost all of our county grant programs, many federal and state programs, is this one, the sources and uses budget. Now, in many ways, the sources and uses budget is very similar to the revenue and expense budget, except in one key area. It doesn't just list the expenses and list the revenue, it associates each line item in its amount with each grantor. This is what we require. So let's take, for example, the first line item on the personnel, the program coordinator, all right? $40,000. All of the money to cover the program's coordinator's salary, $40,000, comes from which source? The DOJ. So none of it comes from Y&H Soda Foundation, and none of it comes from Omega Sci-Fi. But when you get to the mentors in the program, which is $30,000, it's split. $15,000 of that comes from the DOJ grant, and the remaining 15% comes from Y&H Soda, right? You get to the benefits. They split the benefits the same way too. Coordinator and mentor together, $21,000, of which $16,500 comes from the DOJ, and this here, $4,500 comes from Y&H Soda Foundation. So you get a sense here now that when you look at the total of salaries and benefits here, right? When you look at the total of salaries and benefits, this amount comes from the DOJ, and $19,500 comes from the Y&H, none from the fraternity. As I'm reading that, you know what I immediately think, looking at this budget? That the fraternity's money is restricted funding, which means it's designated for a particular purpose, because you notice it's not even split across benefits. It means the fraternity told this organization, we're going to give you $1,700, but you can do only specific things with it. We come down now to the operating expenses. You have the lease that costs this much, and this first line, by the way, is the total cost. And these lines here, they're spread out across the various costs again. And over here, we come back to the total costs again. So now we look at office lease, $4,000 is the total cost. They must be renting in Tupelo, Mississippi.
That's great.
Because even there, nothing might cost $4,000 a year. You know, so yeah, right. So the office lease is $4,000. The DOJ part of that is $1,500, but here it gets inverted. Now, Y&H Soda Foundation is going to pay the bulk of the lease. Do you see that? Now, you come to equipment, and now we begin to see something. $1,200 in equipment, right? And when we look at that $1,200 in equipment, we realize, all of it is charged to Omega Phi Psi Phi 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 Pho Phum. All right? And that tells me that there is a piece of equipment that the fraternity donated the money to them to purchase. But they also managed to cover a little bit of the indirect cost, and that takes care of the whole grant. And that, my friends, is a sources and uses budget. So here's what this tells me, and I'm going to tell you how it actually works. If, for example, you applied for one of our grants, when you come in for an interview, we will say to you, we've looked at your sources and uses budget. We notice that you have applied for a total of, $25,000 from the Y&H Soda Foundation, and that is still pending. Have you heard from them yet as to the status of the grant? No, we haven't. What is your plan for implementation if they do not award it? But that's not all you might hear. You might hear that, let's assume we are the DOJ for a moment, right? And we're interviewing you during this grant process. And you said, well, you've decided to use $1,500 from our grant money to cover the lease. Our grant does not allow for covering lease costs. Are you able to redistribute it By taking that 1,500 and moving it to another source that can pay the cost and shifting a cost that we will actually cover over to us. Those are all the conversations that take place, but can only take place if we're looking at a sources and uses budget. That's the purpose and the reason why we require it. It is actually, in part, a negotiating tool that can work advantageously for you. You see the difference between looking at a simple line item budget, and then there's the budget narrative after that now. And the budget narrative actually says, we're going to explain now what each of these line items mean. And I want to show you that budget I just showed you. Here's what the narrative looks like. It's actually a text narrative, just like you see here. The coordinator is 1 FTE and at $40,000. The coordinator will develop the LIFT curriculum, supervise staff. It tells you what that person is going to do and what you're paying them to do with the money. The next one is the mentor, 1 FTE at $30,000, right? But we discover, wait a minute, 1 FTE doesn't equal 1 person. It's 2 0.5 FTEs combined to be 1. This is what the budget will never tell you without the narrative. The budget said 1 FTE, mentor, $30,000. In fact, it said mentor singular. But now as we look at the budget narrative, we realize, wait a minute. Well, they didn't lie. They did say 1 FTE, but they meant 2 half-time persons. This narrative also enables us in our negotiation with you to say something like, if we were to be able to cover 1 of the mentors as opposed to 2, can you realign funding from another source to cover that? That's why all of this detail becomes so essential. And the benefits, by the way, are at 30%, and it tells you what's covered here. Mandatory and standard employer-paid benefits. Now, there are some benefits that are statutory benefits, Social Security withholdings and so on, unless you're in an exempt organization, and they're required. You have to, right? Disabilities, unless you're a part of a separate agreement, you got to pay those types of things. So there are benefits that employers are required to pay. But then there are non-mandatory benefits that may be considered standard, such as health insurance, all right? There is no, well, under the Affordable Care Act, there are some requirements around, health care benefits and so on, but heaven knows what that looks like these days, right? Yeah, it's absolutely scary. So we don't know, right? So just so you know that you can go down the line and get your budget narrative this way, as I've just shown there. It needs to be. And what I've done here, I've written what is called a general sample in larger print, so you can see what it may look like. Project coordinator, 1 FTE at $55,000 annually. The coordinator will oversee day-to-day program operations, manage case files for up to 150 participating families, and supervise 3 part-time case managers. It's a detailed narrative of who they are and what they are. And the only fault I find with this narrative, why are you so grossly underpaying this person? That's my only fault with this. Oh, it's written perfectly, but it is a crime, right, to pay a person $55,000 a year, right? If you have a family of 3 and this is your income, apply for TANF because you're going to qualify. You're living below the poverty line. And let me just insert this right here. We discovered something about 1 year ago, 2 years ago. Supervisor Glover was still alive. And we would have these conversations, and we discovered that several teachers in the public school system, particularly new teachers without the benefit or long time experience and the size of their households, were qualifying for food stamps. And you know what I kept thinking? We, as Americans, we turn over our kids to these teachers to watch them for more hours than we do in a given day. And then we treat them like they are under. and we pay them, right, what we pay gardeners. That, my friends, is criminal. Yeah. All right. My sister-in-law. My sister-in-law is a special education teacher in New York, and she has to spend so much time buying her own supplies.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, okay, so you're underpaying her. This is a woman with a master's degree in special education, right? And well certified from Hofstra University, brilliant young woman. And I'm saying to myself, wait a minute. Wait a minute. We are paying people who do far less with much less responsibility, much more. It shows, remember what I said about our budget and values? Well, that's our value. That shows me that we don't value education, but guess what? You know what else it shows me? And I know this is going to offend, and pardon the colloquialism, it's going to piss off somebody. It shows me that we value our children less than we do a lot of other things. Because if that's who is taking care of your child, and you're comfortable with making them get by, basically, and you don't create hell over that, then that's on you too. Yeah. Look, I have a babysitter, and I make sure my babysitter is well paid. Because you know what? I want to make sure that when my babysitter goes home at the end of the day, she doesn't feel like, oh, I worked my butt off for nothing.
Absolutely.
And guess what? I even pay her on days off like holidays when I don't have to. I said, I know you're hourly salary, but I need you to spend time with your Thanksgiving family as well. So when she comes back the day after, she feels gratified because she has the benefits that I have, the benefits that she deserves. And that, my friends, is what our teachers deserve. I hate when I get off on these tangents, but I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna move on. Maybe it comes with growing older. I don't know. I don't know. One more thing on the budget, and then we're going to wrap up the last section. I told you we'll get back on time.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, we will after this. After this next part on the budget here, then I'll open it up to questions. Cost per unit of service. You may say, well, what on earth is that? So here's the deal. There are times in those negotiations when you're being interviewed for a grant, when we will ask you, what is your cost for every unit of service you deliver? We're asking that to ensure that there is scalability. So we will then come back and say, we don't have enough money to fund your program. But if each unit of service costs $1,000 and you are asking for 50 units of service, can we give you $30,000 and you deliver 30 units of service? Let me tell you, that is both a concession and a trap. And I'm going to explain to you why in a minute. I want you to watch this. I've put a budget here for a fictitious organization I call the Contra Costa Youth Shelter. And this shelter takes $250,000 to operate in a given year. There are two ways that the unit of service has been calculated in the past for grantors that ask. Number one, you look at the unduplicated number of persons served in a year, and you can say that's 100. Let's say, I'll explain in a moment what unduplicated means. And if you have 100 unduplicated persons served that year, the cost per person, or the cost per unit of service, is $2,500. Here's the problem. Unduplicated means if a person comes into the shelter and spend 10 days, then they go out for 2 days, and they come back and spend 15 days, then they go out for a week. All of that in that year represents only one time in calculating the unit of service. Remember I said it's a double-edged sword, it's a concession and a trap? That's the trap. So this notion, right? This notion, by the way, and interestingly enough, the federal government uses this model for calculation. But it's a trap. Look at the second method, all right? The bed nights. Instead of counting unduplicated persons, you can count the bed nights, and here's how you do that. You can say we have 12 beds, and we multiply that by 3 in this shelter, and we multiply that by 365 days. That means each year has 4,380 bed nights. And the cost per bed night, right, is going to be $57.08. A bit of a trap still, but not as bad as the other one. And let me tell you why this is a problem. Number one, it does not take into account costs that are not variable. If you're running a shelter, right? If you're running a shelter, the lights will need to stay on if there's one person or if there are 10 people. Your electricity cost does not go down. If you're running a shelter and you have staff present, they have to be there, particularly with these small numbers, whether they're 5 people or 8 people. So the fixed costs are not subtracted out in these costs per unit of service. So when you go to a grantor and they say to you, what is your cost per unit of service? Either of those two mechanisms you provide is likely to result in a financial trap for you, because they may scale it down, and when you subtract out your fixed costs, you realize, I can't operate on this, right? So what I've suggested to people to do, all right, given the nature of how this works, is to instead say to the grantor agency, the type of program I operate cannot be based on the regular cost per unit of service. However, if I extract out my fixed costs, these are the invariable costs whether I have 1 or 2 clients, and those fixed costs are $150,000 a year. The remaining 1,000 can be divided into units of service. So if you want me to reduce it, the cost for operating the program, and you want me to provide, instead of services for 12 individuals, right, or 100 unduplicated, whatever the case may be, right, I need to extract out that fixed cost first and then calculate the unit of service. So instead of, half of the clients served resulting in half the money spent, it's going to be about 75%. That is the safest bet to protect your organization. Questions? Can we get a microphone, please? Thank you. By the way, somebody asked me how I speak for this many hours and I don't ever lose my voice. All right? And I have to tell you this, I've been doing it for a long time, a good number of years, but more than that, when you speak something that's not just a point of knowledge for you, but a point of passion, right? You tend to understand what it takes to get the message across. I'm very message driven because this is primary, this is important, this is central to what we do. All right. So no, I don't. I don't lose my voice over things. If you hear me lose my voice, it's because I had the flu or something, or my son brought another one of his colds home from school and handed it to me. Papa hugged me. That's life. All right. Yeah. Questions.
Okay, so my question is, based on extracting the fixed cost from the variable costs. Mm-hmm. If you're using the sources and uses budget, would you then, under the operating expenses, do that too? So
yes,
have
fix
the
the cost
with
in there. That's correct. That's correct. Good. Okay. By the way, that was a good handling of it. Thank you. Over here in the far left.
What are your suggestions when the cost of the program, personnel, like competitive wages, et cetera, are higher than the actual budget amount that's available.
And the grantor approved that approach?
Yes.
I'm not sure if to blame them because, unless you made a promise regarding a supplement. See, from our standpoint as grantors, if you gave us an upside down budget, we wouldn't approve it. We would need to know that it is feasible. Otherwise, it may be considered a bad investment for us. The board of directors may want to know, why is it you granted money when they clearly did not have the ability to actually produce this based on what they've provided in their budget? So it'll be surprising that you would be in that position. But let's say circumstances change mid-cycle where costs went up. The other thing that could cause that is tenure of individuals who may get agency-wide COLAs, cost of living adjustments, right? So you can start off a person earning, $50,000 a year, but they've been there for multiple years, and then you do an agency-wide cost of living adjustment, right, of let's say 5%. So all of a sudden, you've got to tack on more to this person's salary because you cannot exclude that particular person from getting the cost of living adjustment that is agency-wide. They can claim discrimination. So I can see why it can happen. And the solution for that is actually to seek bridge funding. All right? Go out to a second funder and tell them we have this great program that's working. Remember we talked about that this morning? We need to fill a gap, or gap funding it is sometimes called, to fill the gap. And the best and easy way to do it, right, rather than continue to spread out the original grant to the end of the cycle, seek funding for maybe the last 2 to 3 months and roll the original grant into a finite period that covers all the expenses. That's easier and cleaner to do.
Yeah, eventually for this particular grant, we did go back to the funder, but like 5 years later and say, we can't operate like this anymore. We need to lower the outcomes or outputs and increase wages. And they agreed.
Yeah. And they want the program. If it's a 5-year relationship, I would think they want that to work, right? One of the things I should say, by the way, is that when you are doing these things, you need to write projected increases into the agreement with them. They need to take into consideration that there will be cost increases. It is impractical to expect people to work multiple years without adjustments in their salary. Not only that, the cost of benefits may go up. The amount you have to contribute, for example, to disability insurance, all that may go up. All that will go up. So it is only fair to you that they allow you to write those progressive increases in. Yes.
I have 2 questions. Sure. One is that we are all volunteers. So do you recommend on the source budget to put a column of
In kind. Yes, it is. You should do that. Yeah.
operation costs?
And make sure that it matches the actual value of the service provided. So again, the budgets I showed you did not have an in-kind source, but in-kind will tell the grantor, this is what we are getting by other means. It's not cash, but it's other means.
Okay. And then will the grantor ask you if they want that cost per unit in their grant?
Yes, they typically will.
They will tell you.
They will tell you. Don't volunteer it.
Okay. All right.
Really don't. Any others? Okay.
My first question, is it recommended to get refunded by the same grantors or to keep using different sources of funding? Is it ideal to keep going to the same person for funding after that cycle? My second question is about just the use of like Chat GPT.
Yeah.
I know, right? In terms of funding and how to either relate passion or not. Like, I just don't know how that kind of goes together. And then any tips on using data when like perception can be different. So we just talked about like the income and earlier, like the perception that Black women get high rates of Section 8, when really is like 47% of white people, 38% of elderly. So how do we get perception and data to tell a story as well when perception in society is so different?
You know, I really laud your confidence in me that I will remember that entire sequence. Right? But let's start with the first one. What was the first one? Good. Let's take that one first, and I'll come back to you for number 2. All right? Most of our fund recipients are multi-year grantees. Right? For one, grantor agencies like programs that are successful, and those programs may actually have the level of continuity we're looking for. But it comes back to the issue of impacts. At what point is the program no longer needed? Right? I would argue that continued reliance on a grant program for a specific project. Now, there are some programs that by their very nature will and must exist in perpetuity, right? If you are, for example, and again, you know my personal ties to this particular topic, if you are providing services for children, for example, on the spectrum, they will never become unautistic. That is a lifetime commitment. So there are those things that exist in perpetuity that you always know you will have to continue to do. So I want to make sure I'm clear to exempt those from what I'm suggesting about getting to the point of sunsetting programs. Because, particularly in public agencies, we know how to start programs, we don't know how to end them. We don't want to end them, all right? There's a reliance that's built up on them. So yes, you do go back to the same funder if you need to, right? But also begin to expand your other sources as well, because the market may change. And the second thing was ChatGPT. All right. So the issue with ChatGPT is not the fact that it has generative AI at the heart of what it does. That's not the issue. The issue is client confidentiality. If you're writing a proposal and you're drawing on client data, that client data, unless you're in very specific circumstances, will be used to inform and train the AI model. Okay? Which means you may be taking confidential client information and feeding it into a model that is used to instruct others. Now, on the other hand, people like me who work in the university setting, we have a version of ChatGPT where the data is sandboxed. It cannot go out. That's part of the legal contract between OpenAI, for example, and the California State University system-wide. And so constantly across the banner, across the bottom of ChatGPT is this banner that says, your information cannot and will not be used to train our AI models or transfer it out. The funny part is, though, the irony behind it is that other people's contribution can be used to inform ours, but it's not the opposite way around. And that's important, right? That's important. I believe in using any tool that will help you to enhance what you're doing. But notice I said enhance, not create. Right? ChatGPT can be a tool to help you refine. I have students this term who are were working on analysis using software called SPSS, Statistical Package for the Social Sciences. And I told them that once you do your data analysis in SPSS, you do your hypothesis testing, you do your regression analysis, put your results into ChatGPT to see if it concurs with your finding, And if it doesn't, then look to see who is missing something. All right. So there's nothing wrong with that. My course syllabi all say one thing: no more than 20% of the content of your paper may be the product of generative AI. I do understand that there may be some sentences that ChatGPT may create better than you ever can, right? By virtue of the fact that it's leaning on a broad model. So is there something intrinsically wrong with it? No. Is there a risk to client data and confidentiality and even you breaking the law? Yes. And the third one was?
Edited or the data when common protecting the public.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember now what you're asking. That's a hard question. Because let's not whitewash it. The perception you're talking about is not true perception, it's bias. Bias is what tells people, these people do this all the time. Those people do that all the time. This is what we can expect of them. That is bias. And I'm afraid that all the data in the world does not correct bias if people want to hold on to it, right? Otherwise, somebody would have long convinced the crazies. I'll leave it at that. All right, let's do one more, and then we go to our final section, and we will wrap up in roughly 15 minutes. Yes.
Dr. Fraser, so question about how we build the data behind the financials that you're providing. So most organizations, salary tends to be, 60, 75 more of what your budget would look like. For new not-for-profits or new organizations, do you have a sense for like how many cycles should we be looking at in order to come up with that data? Because, for instance, between now, with the pandemic and what's happening right now, all that 5 years of data is all over the place.
Oh, yeah,
So
absolutely.
we can certainly go in the middle, but we're going to end up short changing something, right? Yeah. So then, like, how do you kind of go, you know what, maybe go play here and play there? Or do we use like a risk planning model if we're going to do funding?
Any of those approaches can work. I would suggest, though, doing a comparable salary study that involves similar organizations delivering a type of similar services, but more importantly, requiring similar qualifications. Keeping in mind, however, that there is a difference between salary scales in neighboring counties like Contra, Costa, and Alameda. Alameda County pays more, right? Many, many years ago, we kind of joked about this when Supervisor Glover was a supervisor. This is about 20 years ago. County supervisors at that time were paid $65,000 a year. And people expected them to be there full-time, all the time, doing everything, doing cartwheels, dancing with them, all of it. And I knew what he earned. But I also knew at the same time, in Riverside County in Southern California, the chief of staff who reported to the supervisors were earning $120,000 a year. All right? Contra Costa County, I'm afraid, is notoriously conservative in terms of salary scales. So you have two approaches. Do the salary survey that reflects what the rest of Contra Costa County is doing, or be progressive and likely retain your staff longer by looking at comparable counties around the Bay Area as well.
And then, Dr. Fraser, when you get into a situation where you might have a shortfall, is there ever, or is it a best practice that we can look for, like, I don't know, like bridge funding from a loan, or I don't know. I mean, like, is that done at all?
A bridge funding from a what?
From like a bank loan, a commercial or something. Is that done?
A loan. Well, I mean, I don't mean to wax philosophical here, but the only problem with loans is they have to be repaid. All right? That's the downside. And a lot of banks don't, particularly commercial banks, do not necessarily give favorable rates necessary to nonprofits. Some credit unions may, because they are themselves nonprofits. They may do that as well, right? But ideally, you look for secondary grant programs before you look at loan repayment, because debt servicing can really saddle a nonprofit very, very quickly, depending on your size and scope. And then it becomes even more complex if that debt service includes such things as real property, such as a mortgage, for example, and so on. So, tread carefully. 15 minutes and we're ready to go home, and I'll come back. If at the end of the time, can we come back to that? I just want to quickly cover this last concluding session. It's very brief. I don't want to go straight to page 129. Grant writing is not simply a technical skill. Hear this out. It is at its core an act of trust. Funders rely absolutely on proposals to understand the genuine truth of a project. Ethical breaches, whether by overpromising, misrepresentation, or careless reuse, erode that trust. And in the world of philanthropy, trust is quite simply everything. So when I wrote Grantcraft, I was finished. I wrote the chapters and I was done. And I was going through reviewing it, preparing it for sending off so they can look at what the size of the back cover would be and what the size of the spine would be and everything. And I literally was sitting there one day and I am thinking, you know, I've met some people in my lifetime with regards to grant writing. And it hit me late one night. You never talked about ethics. I reopened the manuscript, the last chapter on ethics. It was never intended to be in there. But I'm glad I did, right? I'm glad I did because that guides a lot of what I do. So why do we need to talk about ethics in grant writing? Well, because in grant writing, you're proposing and hoping for the trust of a grantor agency, and you're making claims that they assume are true. When you say how many clients you're going to serve, they assume you're telling the truth. And when you have transparency and accountability, that is a good thing. I'm going to just quickly go over with you for the next 10 minutes and then we're done. I'm really going to be done at 4:30. But these are the common ethical pitfalls I want to warn you of. Number one, overpromising, inflating what you can deliver, right? And or maybe overpromising who you are, right? Acknowledge the limits of who you are. Copy and paste reuse. Remember we talked about that this morning with that CDC grant? Budget misrepresentation, whether you hide costs or you stretch the truth about costs. And authorship issues, unclear credit for writing and contributions. In my world of academia, you know, we call that plagiarism. Yeah. Yeah. But if you're just going to take information and just reuse it, that becomes a problem. So how do you then, as you're wrapping up your grant writing and as you're working on it, build an ethical framework? Number one, you make sure that your proposal aligns with the community needs. It's reflective of what the community needs, not what you want, right? Maintain accuracy in all your data and budgets, right? Ensure stakeholder and partner consent in their commitments. Let me tell you something. There is nothing more embarrassing, because we had it happen one time where a person applied to us for a grant and they said, we are partnering with X agency, not knowing that X agency was also applying for a grant. And when they came in, we congratulated them on the joint effort. And they said, the who? The what? No, we don't have a partnership with them. You would be amazed how easy it is to catch this stuff. And finally, I will say this. Treat funding as a public trust and responsibly handle the money. That is given to you. That's where I'm going to stop because I want to give you a few more minutes to ask any more questions that you have. And you've got 6 to 7 minutes of questions and answers. But as far as I am concerned, I'm done. All right, we're ready to take the final questions. And by the way, just so you know, for those of you who Supervisor Scales-Preston, we'll come in a moment and chat with you. But yes, just a couple quick questions over here. So she can come in. We'll be ready for her in a minute. Couple quick questions, microphones. And let's go with this lady first because she was a holdover from the last time. She was patiently waiting. Right here. Right here? Right here first. There we go. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kineen. I live in Crockett.
Good town. Good town. Yeah.
So my question earlier was, if you have a good chance of getting money from a foundation that is connected to a corporation whose values and agenda differs from your own, how do you deal with that without feeling like a setup?
Two things. A corporate foundation is technically a separate legal entity from the corporation. What they may share, though, are board members. So don't be surprised if the board of directors for the corporate foundation to be distinguished from a corporate giving program, it's also the board of directors for the corporation. So the question is it separate enough? 2, are the values alignment ideological, or do they translate into practical differences in terms of client delivery of services, right? So, Jeff Bezos, I don't know that I align with him much. Well, my pockets certainly are not as aligned as his, but I don't know if I align much with him on anything, right? But considering how much he takes out of our local communities in terms of Amazon, I feel that this is the least he can do, right, to be a little less of a horrible man. And so will I take his money and give to the kids in my community who needs 2-3 times over, right? You have to know what your own ethical baseline is, right? Now, will I take money from a company that manipulates drug prices for breast cancer survivors? That's a difficult and harder ethical baseline for me, because my sister is a breast cancer survivor and has a double mastectomy to show for it. So for me, that's my ethical hard line. I can't and I don't want anything from you. But when it's something maybe less critical, less personal, and my community can benefit, I just may be willing to take the money with one hand and squeeze my nose with the other. Yeah, over here, please. Ms. Ramos.
My question is, I heard about the salary, on the units, right? Is there a cap for salaries for any executive or whoever gets paid through the grants? No. Is there something at all stated?
I don't know if
So, and who sets that?
the local board of directors for the executive, yeah. So I've yet to have none of our grant programs tell you how much to pay your people. We either tell you we won't pay for it or we will.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's generally the board of directors of the nonprofit that will probably make that determination as to what the salaries are, right? So it's your decision. Now, there's also a known thing in the nonprofit world, unless you do a very specialized service, that the greatest cost center will be personnel.
Yes, it is. I see it in school district.
Yeah.
Right. And
That's to be
my
expected.
second is there anything or will there be any workshop for the community? I see there's so many of our nonprofits across the county. Is there anything that can help us partner in reality? Partner. Because I heard that, it's great to know, right? When we go to the sponsors and they do ask, are you partnering with someone? Yeah. And somebody could say, like, I heard it said, they say yes, but when they actually go back, they might not be. But if they're saying, they're making it believe, yes, we are partnering with the community. We are very united. So how do we promote that partnership in reality?
Supervisor, you want to take that one? Because that really speaks to, I think, your efforts we talked about back in June in Bay Point about those partnerships with nonprofits. Would you?
Thank you, Mrs. Ramos and Dr. Fraser. This is something I talk about all the time, this collaboration, and sometimes I feel like we feel as though we're the only ones that's doing this and we don't want to share the space. Mm-hmm. But collaboration is what also helps you get the grant.
Yep.
So being at the federal level, what I saw when different community groups or nonprofit organizations would collaborate, they ended up getting the grant over the person who decided to apply for themselves. Because someone wants to make sure you're making a big impact if they're going to give you some money. And so if you're collaborating, your impact is going to be a wider reach, right? You're gonna connect with more people. More people will receive those services. So you should, before you leave, make sure you connect with someone in this room to collaborate with. I heard a lot of you talk about food insecurity. Some of you are working with the unhoused. Some of you are working with our youth in the arts, reentry. And I had different people come and talk to me about different things. So I know there's someone in this room can collaborate on the grant. I think that is the thing that we need to focus on, even more so at a time like this. How do we work together to make a bigger impact in our community and make sure that people are receiving direct services, no matter what type of services they are, but we're doing it together. And maybe they're different services. Maybe we're combining their services. Maybe it's an after-school program in workforce development. Maybe it's an after-school program and making sure we're getting food to our young people. We can collaborate those services together. So I think that's a good point to bring up. And hopefully we'll see some of that when we start looking through the grants after Friday, the 31st, for the Community Impact Grant. Because we're trying to make sure we get funds in District 5, from Hercules all the way over to our part of Antioch. And I would love to see collaboration across District 5.
Thank you, Supervisor. One of the things that I've been thinking about for years, and we've just never gotten around to doing it. A lot of new nonprofits get started, and they incorrectly hold the view that once they get that 501c3 determination letter from the IRS, that opens the floodgates of benevolence, and everybody's just knocking on your doors. Grant money over here, get your grant money over here, and it doesn't end up working that way. And part of it is that there are structural inadequacies that are normal to new organizations. And I've really been thinking, Supervisor, over the years about, we convene for granting, but convening because nonprofits are the right arm of the county. You provide services that we can't provide. And so I've been thinking of ways to sort of teach new nonprofits how to structure themselves, how to build their boards, how to advance some of the important reporting requirements that they may have to make them stronger and more sustainable. And I'm still going through that in my head, but that's something I think we can do to be able to bring the nonprofits together and say, okay, let's work from the same point of reference here.
And I think when we're looking at our board, we shouldn't just look at putting our friends on the board.
Cousin Pookie.
Right. We need to build a board with creative talent.
Yep.
So someone on your board who is a networking person, where they can build relationships, that they're help bringing funding into the nonprofit. They're bringing all of those donors over. You need to have someone on your board that can be a grant writer, or someone on your board who can write.
Yeah, period.
Each person on your board should have a role. That's what's going to make your board broader and bigger. Someone on your board should be looking for grants, whether it's through the foundations, the county, the state, the federal. Everyone has a different role. And when you meet, you're coming together for that. So that's how you should start building your board and think about what that looks like. Hey, you might meet somebody in the community that is brilliant, and you didn't even think about, like, oh, this would be a good person on my board. Go back and talk to them and get them on your board. They're looking to do something most of the time.
Yep. All right. I see another hand. Please go right ahead. We need a microphone. Thanks.
Hello, Corey with We Care for All and Prime Them Providers. So I had the two-part. Well, one was going to be about collaboration and actually wanting to find out more about collaborating like with the county itself for like what for its efforts in the same regards to what it does as alongside with our nonprofit, and seeing if there's a way to actually collaborate with the county with some of the efforts in regards to like education, dental, working with the youth and so forth. And then the other piece was just at the end you touched on the ethics, which is I guess the biggest concern in regards to, I just wanted, I guess, some tips in writing. I don't think before the 31st we'll have everything set for our partnership that we are working. So how would you suggest, we don't want to be liars, basically, and say that, oh, it's set and it's done. So going forward in writing the proposal, how would you, how is it best to put in there for the proposed partnerships?
Have you looked at the
Partnerships that are in the work, I guess I should in the works.
Yeah. Have you looked at the application questions for the Community Impact Fund?
Yes.
Okay.
You're talking
Yeah.
about
And you're thinking specifically about partnerships and what that should look like in relationship to that fund or in general?
I'm not gonna hold you. I can't remember at the moment I have looked at it, but I can't remember. But I am thinking we're more concerned about getting this one done first. So I am asking more in regards to Wismar.
So partnerships convey the idea that you've leveraged other resources beyond what is happening here. The Community Impact Fund is a one-time grant, and it will expire in terms of the contract period after 1 year, and then that's gone. We would hope that people do not create a program, particularly with vulnerable populations, and that becomes a falling off the cliff 1 year later when this fund ends. And so we would suggest to people that programs that need to exist in perpetuity, or at least for the foreseeable future, may not be ideal for this. For example, you don't want to use the Community Impact Fund to hire somebody in a full-time position that will end in just a matter of months, right? So there is that piece. But in terms of partnerships, one of the things I always suggest to organizations is do not pretend that partnerships exist where they don't. What you do is outline your strategy for forging partners in the future. I intend to reach out to this number of organizations, and these are the things I intend to do. Because this program is now under development, the partners are not yet on board, but should the grant be awarded, the partnerships, as they become aligned and as the MOUs, Memoranda of Understanding, are actually signed, we will submit a supplement to our proposal. Yes. I see two more, and because we want to respect the space that they have a meeting coming up later, we'll take just you and you in the back, and then that's it for today, folks.
I was just wondering, what is an estimated timeline to writing a grant? How long does it take the process from beginning to end, more or less in real?
With or without AI? I just had to throw that in there. There is no answer to that question because it really depends. The Community Impact Fund has 27 questions. And those 27 questions, I would say roughly a third of them are data, factual questions such as name of person applying, organization applying, your 501c3 or 501c6 status, your address. Those are factual data types of questions. Substantive questions to the heart of what you're proposing will probably take, I would say, maybe a couple hours to put together and respond. At most, if you have it in order already. That is why you can request from us a copy of the questions in advance, because this is an online application, and unless you answer the first 7 questions, it does not allow you to proceed to question 8. All right, I know I designed it. And that was intended to make sure people focus on not missing questions. If you missed any, it won't let you move forward. So I think you get the thing in advance and you write out your questions, type them up somewhere else, whether in Google Docs or something else if you're using Word or wherever, and then copy and paste. So that's the best thing. But realistically, the Community Impact Fund application, if you have your program designed in your head, should take no more than a couple hours at very most.
Okay. And so if we're applying to other grants.
Oh, those can take hours, days, weeks to complete. Oh yeah, this is writing a proposal. You can ask some of my grad students who have written proposals. It often takes them weeks to write their proposals because a full-fledged proposal based on the parameters I provided today can be 20 pages long, 30 pages long. Some can be shorter, 15 pages long. So it really depends.
So it ranges to.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you.
You live here in Contra Costa County?
No, we're from Oakland.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're looking for other type of brands in that area.
Well, if you're from Oakland, feel free to stop by the the Cal State East Bay, which is Hayward, south of you, library. They have copies of the book Grantcraft in there because there are 2 full sample proposals in the back of the book.
Oh, okay.
Written by graduate students. They are superb proposals. That's why I included them. And you will get a sense as to what I'm talking about and the number of things that go into it, and you'll realize why it takes so long.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
All right. One more question in the back, and then we're going to have to get out of here, folks. Unless you're buying dinner.
Thank you so much. So I have a question around, I think the art, I guess.
All right, folks, could we please just do her a little bit of respect? Go ahead.
Thank you. I think the big issue, at least as smaller nonprofits, is that you're competing against folks that have systems in place, right? They have full-time grant managers, they have full-time grant writers, and they have processes and policies in place to make that as efficient and as possible. And I think I guess my question is, how are we thinking about maybe making funds more equitable in terms of because obviously this is a competitive process. And so depending, again, equity-wise, like if you have all these systems in place, it's easier for you and more likely that you are going to get these funds. So I think my question for me is how are we thinking about process systemically? Like how are we also thinking about equity, when we have funds like this? And I think this is a great space, and I think this is a great start. And maybe this is a request for Supervisor Shanelle is maybe requesting other supervisors, holding spaces like this, because I think this also allows for smaller nonprofits to kind of gain that capacity. And so it's leading me into my second question, which at the beginning you sort of mentioned that grants really are about the relationships that you have to funders, potential funders, people in your region, in your state even. And so I guess the question for me is, as staff, right, especially if you're in a smaller organization where you don't have these full-time positions where they're entirely dedicated to looking for funding, what kind of capacity building should we be thinking about for staff when it comes to relationship building and kind of maybe working into our positions what it means to build relationships, to be strategic partners with other folks?
Supervisor Scales-Preston and Supervisor Diane Burgess, who are in District 5 and District 3 respectively, with District 5 being largely west of District 3 in terms of the footprint, proposed to the Board of Supervisors, and ultimately it was adopted already, a capacity building initiative for East County nonprofits that will cover nonprofit organizations in Pittsburgh, Bay Point, Antioch, and Points East. Now, that capacity building initiative, the Los Medanos College will be taking the lead on it, addressing if not all, of the issues you just raised. Now, I do get it that that's a specific region within the county. We're talking 2 supervisorial districts here, and maybe it needs to be a county-wide thing. But again, that may be where a conversation is needed, because I believe that capacity building initiative for East County was facilitated contractually with Measure X funds, right? So there's a possibility that other district supervisors can do the same. I do know they did a press release last week, so if you're in the eastern part of the county, then look out for that. There's some great strategies coming, and I think it's going to be very, very useful. That said, in District 5, we will continue to do what we can because Supervisor Scales-Preston has the most grant programs of any county supervisor. She has 4. That's a lot. the Keller Canyon Mitigation Fund, the Los Medanos Healthcare Fund, the Community Impact Fund is temporary. That's why I'm not including that, but that's a temporary one. And then you have the 2 community benefit funds, the CBA money for Central and, of course, here in West County. That's a lot. So we have a vested interest because of the sheer footprint of the District 5 grants skates, so to speak, that we have to continue providing this kind of support. So if you're in District 5, I will say, for all the things you ask about, you're in good company because we're going to be making sure that you get it because we want to get the funds out to you. We're not trying to hold it back. We're trying to get the money out. All right, so you'll see more of this. But I suggest if you're not in District 5, you reach out to your respective district supervisors and ask them if they're willing to continue to look at some things like that. Yeah. Well, folks, thank you so much. Have a good evening.